Thanks for joining us on this breaking news. Again, shares of NVIDIA down about 5% right now. I want to ask you, why is this stock selling off so hard? We've seen a lot of different numbers come out about the fact that the percentage of revenues tied to China has been reduced over recent quarters. Morningstar outstanding, it's about 10%. So why is the stock hit so hard?
Yeah, Frank, it's really more strategically what this means. I mean, Street's basically going to assume that China is almost a zero for NVIDIA. I mean, this is really a blockade that started. And look, we know, I mean, what's the biggest asset we have? There's one chip in the world that's fueling the AI revolution. It's NVIDIA. So by them doing this, this is kind of the first shot across the bow in terms of what we're going to see. And obviously, there's going to be a huge ripple effect. But Street basically is going to, at this point, take numbers down by 10%. That's essentially now what's factored in. But look, Frank, we've talked about it. This is part of a trade war. And it's going to happen. It doesn't change, in my view, if you're able to look through the storm. There's a lot of volatility ahead. But this is going to be, in terms of when you're thinking about chess, I mean, it's the king chess player, right, when it comes to NVIDIA chips.
Also a hit on AMD, also new export controls on their chips as well. How meaningful is it for that stock?
More meaningful for AMD than NVIDIA. So I'd expect AMD to be down more than NVIDIA, just given, a quarter revenue, whatever that comes from China. That's going to be a gut punch for this. And look, market's trying to adjust. These are now the first steps. We're seeing the real economic difference when it comes to when you take China and actually restrict it.
Let's begin with NVIDIA, down sharply in the pre-market. Company says it expects to take those quarterly charges of up to $5.5 billion associated with U.S. restrictions on its H20 GPU exports to China. In a regulatory filing, the chipmaker says it was informed by the U.S. government it now needs a license for exporting such processors to China and other countries. Jim, some reporting today about whether or not they kept some of their Chinese customers in the dark for about a week on some of this?
Well, I mean, if you take a look at that NPR report that's April 8th that said, look, they're probably going to be okay. And I think they're holding their breath. I think they felt that they would be okay. So when I read that story, I just think, is that really the case? That they really just say they kept the Chinese in the dark? How about they kept, everybody who owns the stock in the dark? I care more about that than I care about the Chinese, for heaven's sake. Now, maybe they really did hope, and I think a lot of times what happens when you hope that something's good, you maybe get a wink and a nod. You don't feel like, well, you got to come out and say, you know what, this could happen. I just don't really care one bit about the Chinese not knowing if Jensen Huang didn't know. What, are you kidding? I think Jensen Huang's an honest man. I think he didn't really know. I do believe, though, that you could be led to believe one thing in the administration and then David Blow the other. Just take a look at what happened on Friday night when you were led to believe that perhaps there were exemptions for some tech. And then on Sunday, when you heard Howard Lutnick, you were led to believe that there weren't. So I don't think that Jensen's in any position other than every other executive that has been dealing with this administration.
Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth. Again, the exemptions is a good example. To some extent, of course, we are waiting for the National Security Review, which is now taking place in terms of chips, which obviously is also going to be important. There was that meeting between Jensen Huang and the president at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks back now, I think we're talking at this point. But I think there was hope perhaps that something would have come out of that would have been helpful for the company. Doesn't appear to have been the case. And again, we are talking about H20 chips here. So, these are old, so to speak, but yet we're powering a lot of what DeepSeek seems to have accomplished, for example.
Yes.
And that is not unimportant, and maybe one reason why the U.S. says, hey, this is still a real threat, and we can't allow the Chinese to have them.
Yeah, I mean, really well put. I also want to point out that while they are not the latest and greatest, people talking about being 2 generations old,
yes,
they're still NVIDIA chips that can do a lot more than everybody else. I am surprised they take a $5.5 billion charge for chips that I think somebody wanted, but I don't know how that's going to work. I do want to point out something that is not in the news that people should realize. NVIDIA's dropped now about $4 more than it did at 4 a.m. But if you go look at the missiles that the U.S. used in Ukraine, those are guided by NVIDIA chips. So you can say all you want that this is really about DeepSeek, but I'm sure that there's someone in the administration that's about military. Because if you can get these chips souped up again, you're going to be able to put them in missiles the way that all the missiles that we make have NVIDIA. I don't think people realize that.
I thought it was just about guidance for those missiles.
It's
Do you
NVIDIA.
know what the chips actually do? Why they would need GPUs?
It's actually NVIDIA, yeah. It's NVIDIA.
You don't know what they do, though, do you? Or
No,
why?
but you have to use them for guidance. And
Really?
Yeah, and I don't think people recognize. I mean, you take a look at the RTX missiles that we use. RTX, I mean, if you look at the list of missiles that they make,
Yeah.
your first instinct is to say, okay, so they were the missile company that we gave the missiles to Ukraine. Those are RTX missiles. They are air-to-air missiles. They are Sidewinders. They are Phoenix missiles. They're air-to-ground missiles. They're global reach missiles. They're well, I'm telling you, it's a lot of missiles, and they're NVIDIA missiles. So maybe you don't want the Chinese to have NVIDIA.
We're going to talk about
NVIDIA and AMD shares sliding, both warning about big charges related to export restrictions. Christina Partsinevelos has the latest. Christina.
Well, it's been quite the policy reversal, Leslie. NVIDIA announced Tuesday it faces, like you said, $5.5 billion charge after the U.S. government imposed new export restrictions on its H20 AI chips that are made specifically for China. The charge will be taken in Q1, and it'll cover H20 inventory and purchase commitments, as well as some related reserves, but comes just over a week. I remember reporting this 2 Fridays ago after CEO Jensen Huang reportedly secured a reprieve during a high-profile dinner at Mar-a-Lago. The licensing requirements, though, are set to remain for the indefinite future and come despite NVIDIA's announcement just on Monday about plans to invest $500 billion in U.S.-based AI infrastructure. Well, there's the art of the deal. While significant, the impact may be contained, though. China accounted for approximately $17 billion in NVIDIA's fiscal 2025 revenue, representing just 13% of total revenue, which is the smallest percentage in over a decade. But based off of a lot of sell-side research this morning, they are expecting an impact to Q1 EPS, which is why you're seeing the stock fall about 6%. AMD also said it would take an $800 million charge in the quarter, and this is in a filing today. AMD said it will seek licenses to export to customers in China, but cannot be sure of securing them. That's because these licenses could take up to 6 or 12 months to actually procure, but a bigger threat looms. Potential AI diffusion rules could take effect in May. These would limit NVIDIA as well as AMD sales to many more countries and customers. So this regulatory whiplash really highlights the unpredictable nature of tech trade policy under the Trump administration, where even personal appeals at million-dollar dinners don't offer guarantees. Carl?
Christina, yeah.
Or David.
No. I just had a question quickly. I mean, you kind of answered it. The licenses. I mean, there seems to be an expectation in the marketplace they're not going to get the licenses, even though it's not being deemed blocking entirely the sales. That seems to be the way the market seems to be thinking about it.
If you were to take the CHIPS Act and how long that takes to disperse and all the people involved, I know it's not exactly the same people under the Trump administration, but just think of all the paperwork they have to go through, figuring out where the supply chain, and then providing them with the license. So that is the assumption that it could take up to a year to even get. And then the chips would be obsolete to a certain degree.
Well, even if they were to get this license, for example, it could take as much as a year. I mean, do you basically say at this point the H20 in terms of sales to China is no longer going to ever happen?
Well, a license has never been granted for a accelerator GPU into China, so I think the odds are very slim. And I would highlight that, that is a very negative, factor for the United States. There are 20 GPU companies, indigenous to China. There are 4 that are actually quite good, and they're all within 1 to 2 years of providing a product that can compete with the H20 or potentially be better. And so I think the key question is, do you want those revenues going to Chinese companies, or do you want them going to NVIDIA as well as AMD? And, I think the decision that the U.S. government made is the wrong one.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny. We were having a bit of a discussion this morning in the 9 about potential competition from domestic Chinese companies. I was looking at a competitor's note talking about Huawei's new AI Cloud Matrix 384 supernode nuclear-grade rack-scale system based on Ascen's 910C chips. I mean, is that the kind of thing you're talking about? And does that, where are the Chinese in terms of developing their own domestic chip industry and potentially even competing with some of the lower-end chips from our providers?
Yeah, I mean, that's Huawei. There's Byron. Cambricon. There's another major one I'm spacing, but they're real. I think that they are clearly behind in terms of not having access to the leading edge wafers from TSMC, but they're making up for it with a overall system solution that has robust networking and other capabilities that are enabling them to come to market with a solution that is quite good for AI. I would never discount kind of China, and so that they're going to be very aggressive. And I think on this front, it would be better to perhaps have a bar that they can't access and have U.S. Have maybe 3 nodes of it in advancement, but keep the window open for supply from these U.S. or multinational vendors, such that the revenues and the R&D capabilities accrue to the multinationals as opposed to the indigenous Chinese companies. So this is only going to make internal China semiconductors stronger.
Can you, CJ, explain the accounting decision making here to write down the inventory? Why can't they just sell these chips to another non-Chinese country?
Yeah, so here's the discouraging part, right? They were building hoppers for China, and then the U.S. government came in and said, well, you can't ship that high-level GPU. We need you to lower the specs, and that's where NVIDIA came up with the H20. So that's a chip that is only sold into China, specifically for China, and that everywhere else globally, they want access to the more, bleeding edge chips from NVIDIA. So it's a chip specifically designed for China. And if there's not going to be a license granted for shipment, then they're obsolete.
We have the NVIDIA news, Weiss. It's obviously sinking on the export rules, the charge, $5.5 billion. Piper Sandler takes the price target to 150. Raymond James takes it to that same level. You sold half your position today, this morning, on this news?
I did. And as you recall, I put it on about a week ago. And I said when I was on the show last that it was a trading position. So the reason for holding on to the trading position at this point escapes me. Now, on a day like today, which is part of motion and mostly reality as to what the future may hold for them in terms of perception, we don't know factually what it holds. I just said, let me get rid of half of it and wait for a better opportunity to get rid of the rest of it. Because my bearish sentiment on the market has not changed. And as a matter of fact, it's fortified by announcements like that. NVIDIA will not be the last one to do this. Well, AMD already did.
I mean, AMD's getting hammered today, too.
AMD will, and you'll see others that'll do it.
Micron, Marvell are down.
It's going to be across the board. It's going to be across the board. And there's just, having attended, a few different conferences, small conferences, haven't spoken to many bankers, many PE people, many single-family offices that invest directly in the cap table, CEOs. Nothing is going on. Everybody's frozen. And what you're using your capital for is to protect the companies you already own. If you're a CEO, you're using it. You're not spending it. Capital, expenditures are grind to a halt, except necessary ones. And frankly, I think we're going to see this when the hyperscalers report and talk again about a slowdown in cloud spending. So, look, this just is another warning sign, and I think that plenty of trouble ahead.
I mean, are you suggesting that chips at this moment are, I don't know if the right word is uninvestable, but unanalyzable at minimum, just because you really just don't know where this is going?
Yeah, and there's another element. So with the embargo, and that's my term, but it's accurate, that China's putting on rare earth, and with Ukraine not mining rare earth yet, and with the U.S. sole mine already committed, frankly, comes on the end of the year, you can't make semis without rare earth. So even if you've got facilities up and running in the U.S., which you really don't, I mean, you got Skyworks or something, et cetera, you're not going to be able to make chips anyway. So yes, so they're unanalyzable. It doesn't mean I'm selling Taiwan Semi, because ultimately we will get through this. I'm not buying more because I'm full, number one. I wouldn't buy more anyway, because I think you get a better point of entry.
So why isn't it, Kevin, a 22% discount year to date on NVIDIA is a buy? relative to what their position is, what their position is going to remain to be, the fact that the hyperscalers suggest they're still spending all this money. There's no reason to believe that demand's going to tail off anytime soon. Why isn't $104 and change a gift?
I think it is. I think we had a better gift last week when I think it got down to 88. Maybe that was a little bit more attractive there, but it's very difficult to pick bottoms and tops. So to Steve's point, from a trading position, this could be dead money for another year in a range-bound stock. But I think to your point, Scott, at 104, when you look at all of the metrics that they can predict, and there's a lot that they can't, and your word unpredictability, I may have to steal that and borrow it because there's so much uncertainty. But yes, if you're an investor and you've got a little bit more than a few month time frame, I think 104 is a buy.
What do you think of the chips here?
Yeah, I think the word you used, Scott, uninvestable, for now it actually is the case.
I wasn't, I said unanalyzable.
Well,
I don't know if you would go as far. I mean, that's not for me to say, but
for me,
you
at
do
the
this
moment,
for a living.
For me, at the moment, they are actually uninvestable, and it's for a couple of reasons. You know, first of all, chips are completely a bargaining chip in this trade war, and we're seeing that on full display today. And then there's this longer-term consideration, I think, of this U.S.-China decoupling, and there's a long-term intent to not let those chips go to China. So the other reason why I think chips at the moment are uninvestable because they're highly cyclical, and so they're going to get caught up in what Steve is talking about, which is lack of capex, lack of any sort of cyclical momentum. And if you look at the last instance of the trade war in 2018, chips really did take it on the nose. They were down 35%. So I think we may still have more downside to go. And yes, I like the valuation, which is the lowest levels. But in a market like this, you can't look at valuations purely. You can't look at technicals if you can't identify a catalyst, and right now I can't.
There is a very positive, still fundamental backdrop around NVIDIA.
CapEx. There is, but you're also seeing a slowdown in CapEx to data centers as well. That's an end market, and China is a huge market for them, right? So China's had this playbook to wean themselves off dependence.
You're not really seeing that much of a slowdown yet, though. I mean, you have talked about potential. If things go bad with GDP and the growth in the economy, then of course you could potentially see it. But you haven't really seen definitive pullback in spending from not from hyperscalers, from the hyperscalers.
You're seeing delays. You're seeing, more importantly, like one company, one CEO I was talking to, who's looking to build out a warehouse, not a data center warehouse, switch their supply chain, their vendors from China to India. And they've been told that those supplies, which are critical to them, are going to sit on the ocean for 4 to 6 months. So it's going to take a while to get things here.
The juicy part of this story is a Reuters exclusive report today that suggests NVIDIA didn't warn at least some of its major customers in advance about all of this, and it was told a week ago. That's according to a couple of sources that Reuters cites in what they say is an exclusive report. It leads to the question, of course, what did NVIDIA know and when did it know it? Who better to chase that down than Christina Partsenevelos? Do you have any insight in that very question?
Yeah, the answer is Chinese hyperscalers. They've been apparently anticipating these restrictions, and I say that because they've been stockpiling H20 chips before this ban was even announced. Supply checks, and this is not coming from me, but from sell-side research, has confirmed big players, which we would assume Tencent, Alibaba, were actively purchasing these H20 chips throughout this entire quarter. And there was even a report from The Information indicating $16 billion worth already sold to China. I'm unsure if that is 16 billion, but we could assume it's in the billions. So to your point, that Reuters report saying some Chinese customers are frustrated because NVIDIA didn't warn them despite knowing a week in advance, this really suggests two things, Scott. Either NVIDIA selectively informed major customers, which would explain the stockpiling, or was genuinely surprised by the shifting White House position. Because keep in mind, Jensen Huang, the CEO, was just in Mar-a-Lago at a supposedly $1 million dinner. But analyst estimates are coming down today across the board, lowering price targets. And I know Weiss was just talking about how much China represented of NVIDIA's total revenue. It was about 13% fiscal 2025. So this write-down of $5.5 billion is substantial and indicates a big thing, that NVIDIA really has little confidence in securing export licenses, which could take up to a year to process. In other words, a ban. And I'm using the word ban. I took that from UBS. So a lot of people agree with me. And Mizuho calculates this loss at about $7 to $9 billion, which is approximately 5% of total July quarter revenue, which could be explaining this 7% sell-off and maybe why, Scott, to your question, why people may not be interested in buying into the stock just yet.
All right, folks, so the news that set the tone for today's session was actually released last night after the closing bell. By now, you know NVIDIA taking a $5.5 billion charge. The export controls came out last night. Their H20 chips are covered there. You know, interestingly, though, I've read a couple of pieces that say this news might actually have a silver lining, right? You have some people saying maybe a silver lining. Luckily, though, we've got the best in the business when it comes to technology. Joining us now, Evercore ISI, their head of internet research, Mark Mahaney. Mark, listen, some are saying that the NVIDIA news, though, also speaks to the hyperscalers. In other words, you know, this H20 chip, just that alone, the stock shouldn't be down, or there should be other buyers out there. I know it's all about Blackwell, but some folks are saying there's other fundamental issues going on here that this just simply reveals.
Let me try a different tack on this. What the market wants is certainty, and they don't want regulatory surprises or tariff surprises. So when you have that, the market sells off. The sooner we get beyond these this volatility in regulations and decisions, and we get the tariff scare starts to come down a little bit, the markets will respond well to that. I think that was really the read from what happened with NVIDIA. Now, stepping aside, I think NVIDIA, without covering it, I think is extremely well placed. I cover its biggest customers, and companies like Google, Amazon, Meta, they're not stopping in terms of building out
Every
AI.
time they say they're not stopping, you get a slew of folks that go in financial media and say they're stopping. And the companies just reiterated to your point that they're going to keep up these budgets, and still, there's a major disconnect. Wall Street, not necessarily cheering the demise of all of this, but they keep predicting and it's over.
So there's a great letter that was written last week. It's the Amazon shareholder letter. And if you go into that, you'll see Andy Jassy, the CEO, talk about why he's so enthusiastic about AI, Gen AI. All of the deployment so far has been kind of cost management, productivity improvements. But he's got 1,000 within Amazon. There are 1,000 applications that will lead to more personalization, better customization, more revenue, whether it's video, retail, advertising revenue. And that's why these companies are investing so aggressively in the space. Investors haven't quite seen it yet. We think they're going to see it in the next year or two, and the AI wave will come back.
We already knew that it was a bad day that was shaping up here because of these export restrictions to China. Shares were already down all day, and then there was a new report within the last hour or so that led to another leg lower. What was it?
Yeah, it was a new report about a congressional investigation. The House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party has launched its first ever investigation into the chip maker NVIDIA to determine if it knowingly provided critical AI technology to Chinese firms in violation of export controls. This is according to the New York Times you're seeing on your screen, but I can also confirm NVIDIA has been questioned by Congress on this matter, but this right now is additional scrutiny, and that's why you saw the stock, you're seeing it hit session lows right now, down 10%. NVIDIA responding within 5 minutes ago, just on my phone, saying that from a spokesperson, they follow the government's direction to the letter. Quote, if the government felt otherwise, it would instruct us. Our Singapore revenue indicates the billing address often for subsidiaries of our U.S. customers. The associated products are shipped to other locations, including the U.S. and Taiwan, not China. NVIDIA was already, though, trading lower, as you mentioned, after announcing a $5.5 billion Q1 charge following new U.S. government export restrictions on the sale of these advanced chips to China. Evercore ISI actually put out a really interesting notice this afternoon saying the CFO of NVIDIA doesn't see much market for those H20 chips outside of China, and that the production lines use completely different manufacturing processes, so they can't really be repurposed for Blackwell chips, which is this upcoming iteration. And so that's why NVIDIA had to write off so much, $5.5 billion. Morgan Stanley indicates these license requirements will reduce data center revenues by 8 to 9% over the next few quarters.
All right, meantime, semis among the biggest losers in today's sell-off. NVIDIA dropping nearly 7%. It had been down more than 10% at its lows. That after the company warned last night of a more than $5 billion charge tied to chip exports to China. Taiwan Semi and ASML Holdings also under pressure today. Thrown AMD, which also said it would have a write-down because of its exposure in terms of a chip specifically made for the China export market. We also got a headline from NVIDIA indicating that it had received $18 billion in orders at the beginning of Q1, so that $5.5 billion write-down reflects that $18 billion in orders at the beginning of Q1.
Yeah, we were talking about just before the show. That would have been a nice margin, a little bit higher margin on those chips than I would have thought, because their highest margin chips are in the low 70 range. So, it's it's not surprising that it sold off more than that because you don't get the feeling like, okay, that now we know exactly where we are.
Right.
We have no idea. So it's understandable why it's trading so poorly.
The technicians are, and I'm not one of them, but I do care about technicals as part of an overall mosaic or whatever we want to say. It sets up a picture. If you look at a 10-year chart of AMD, this has been one of the great growth stories over that last decade. We're at some really key if you look at long-term uptrend on a monthly chart going back 10 years, we're right there at support. If you look at a lot of semis, the damage that's been done, the question is, has technical damage been done in a way that these things need to go lower here? This is a very important level, and you mentioned AMD. That's a fascinating chart.
When you look at the chart in NVIDIA, it looks like it got down to $92. I think the next level, you have to go back to that $75 level. That was back in April of 2024. I think you could definitely trade down to that level. This licensing that they have to apply or pay for, that's never going to take place. That's a negotiating tactic. That'll never happen. It has never happened, or you can count on one hand or only using one finger how many times it has happened. It's not happening.
Which finger?
Let's think about the travails of one of my all-time favorite companies. Let's think about NVIDIA. Here's a business that makes the best technology product the world has ever seen, run by one of the greatest visionaries of all time, not just our time, Jensen Huang. NVIDIA's advanced chips are the key to everything from agentics and thinking bots to humanoid robots, self-driving cars. Its chips practically sell themselves and are at the heart of the new industrial revolution. Now, this is a company that makes our nation proud. No country wants to be left behind with the Industrial Revolution, particularly one based on AI, right? And no country like China wants to be left behind. For NVIDIA, China's the best kind of customer they could possibly have. I'm sure that China would happily buy huge numbers of chips. They'd probably buy all the chips. But what NVIDIA didn't know was that it was selling its chips to an enemy nation. I don't blame them for not knowing, because nobody knew. At least nobody was operating under the rules of either President Biden or the previous president, President Trump. China was very open for business under those two. Sure, in his first term, President Trump was no friend to the People's Republic of China, but he wasn't a rabid hater either. Then again, China did grow more oppositional, although it's not like it was ever a secret that the PRC was an authoritarian dictatorship with global ambitions, sometimes antithetical to that of our own. Both parties now want to contain China. The Biden administration decided to limit some dumbed-down NVIDIA chips, literally ones that were nowhere near as good as the cutting-edge stuff that you could sell here. It was a shocking move, but even NVIDIA's lesser chips were fast enough that China lapped them up. They even found a way to string them together, produce more efficient AI models like DeepSeek. So those sanctions did backfire. At that point, two imperatives burst forward in the new administration. One, the Trump team realized that NVIDIA's dumbed-down H20 chips were way too powerful for a country that's now our serious rival in pretty much everything. If you're putting an effective economic embargo on China, you shouldn't be sending them potato chips, let alone microchips. Second, the Trump team decided that companies like NVIDIA and Apple should move their manufacturing back home and do so pronto, Trump time. But everybody knows that America is a very expensive place to manufacture things. If you want to successfully mass-produce great products at affordable prices, you need to move your manufacturing overseas, to countries with lower wages or countries where the government more or less is subsidizing manufacturing, like China. We practice free market capitalism in this country, and the free market wants you to outsource. If you're a rich, developed country and you try to make this stuff domestically, you end up being like Research in Motion, a.k.a. BlackBerry, the Canadian also-ran smartphone player. But those are the rules now. So NVIDIA commits to producing up to $500 billion AI infrastructure here in the U.S. They already started making Blackwell chips in Arizona. They're going to make supercomputers in Texas. Yes! Now, here's where things get interesting. The president is known for being the most serious practitioner of the art of the deal, correct? You agree with me, right? When we saw that NVIDIA was going to make $500 billion with its computers and so much other stuff here, Wall Street mistakenly believed that there had to be some sort of quid pro quo. NVIDIA would spend big here to increase its domestic manufacturing footprint, and Trump would leave NVIDIA alone elsewhere. NVIDIA never said there was a quid pro quo, though. But how do you do $500 billion worth of business and not think that you get something out of it? And the answer is you did get something out of it. You get to build in the highest cost country in the world, the one that has few engineers and tough environmental regulations. Doesn't sound like a great deal to me, but it was the only one that seemed to be offered. Last night, not long after we thought that NVIDIA could still sell China those H20 chips, we found out that was over too, and it had to take a $5.5 billion charge. For all intents and purposes, NVIDIA may be done with China. If that's the case, Wall Street acted as if they were done with NVIDIA, and its stock got crushed down almost 7%.
All right, I hope you're all doing well and staying calm in this crazy market. The S&P finished the day about 2.2% lower, and NVIDIA finished the day almost 7% lower after yesterday's announcement of U.S. export restrictions to China. Really quick, I want to clarify something I said in yesterday's video. In yesterday's video, I said that this is not a ban on H20 exports to China, but that NVIDIA is facing a new license requirement in order to export those chips to China. At the same time, it could potentially be a long time before NVIDIA obtains a license from the U.S. government. And so, in the immediate term, this has the effect of a temporary ban. If the administration reverses course on the issue, or if they provide some sort of exemption for NVIDIA and AMD so they don't have to write off massive losses on inventory, then we could potentially see NVIDIA be allowed to sell these chips again at some point in the future. But let's be real. I have no idea if or when that will happen. I've been thinking about this situation over the last 24 hours, and I wonder about a couple of things. I wonder if the administration is preparing for talks with China and using this situation to give themselves more leverage ahead of any negotiations with China. I also wonder if the administration may change their mind on the H20 restriction because, as pointed out by analyst Dylan Patel of Semi-Analysis, Huawei is not far behind NVIDIA's H20. Cutting of China's access to NVIDIA's chips will likely result in China pouring more funding into the development of their own AI chips. They are far behind NVIDIA's latest chips at the moment, but they are not far away from having a comparable competitor to the H20. This situation begs the question, could the H20 export restriction have the opposite effect of what the administration intends? I don't know, because we don't really know what the administration's intent is with this restriction. Are they trying to give themselves more leverage ahead of potential negotiations with China, or are they trying to limit Chinese advances in AI? If they're trying to limit Chinese advances in AI, then this could have the opposite effect over the long term, as it could spur China to accelerate research and development of their own AI chips. And so I do wonder if we could see a policy reversal or some sort of exemption to the restriction in the future. Now, regarding NVIDIA's upcoming earnings report, I was very optimistic about NVIDIA's May earnings, as Blackwell is ramping in production and we were expecting margins to return to the mid-70s later this year. But now I'm not optimistic about this earnings report, and that is very unfortunate. For context, NVIDIA guided Q1 revenue of $43 billion. A charge of $5.5 billion is nearly 13% of $43 billion. That is a massive hit to this quarter's revenue, and so I would be shocked if NVIDIA were still able to deliver on guidance for the quarter. Based on NVIDIA's 8K filing yesterday, they clearly do not think that they will be able to obtain a license from the U.S. government before the end of the quarter. And I would honestly be surprised if the administration granted a license to NVIDIA before the Commerce Department's study of the semiconductor supply chain has concluded. Looking ahead, we have the semiconductor tariffs that are expected to be announced at some point in a month or so, and then we have the AI diffusion rule set to go into effect in May. The AI diffusion rule would impose even harsher restrictions on NVIDIA's exports to other countries besides China. I'm still bullish on the long-term future of NVIDIA, but I have to be honest with you. I'm not optimistic about NVIDIA for the short term unless we get some massively positive news. Looking ahead, be prepared for hyperscaler earnings. Alphabet reports earnings on April 24th, and both Microsoft and Meta report on April 30th. Market participants will be watching these companies' CapEx guidance very closely given the recent tariff situation. If they pause or pull back on CapEx, then we could see NVIDIA trade lower on the news. At the same time, if the hyperscalers were maintain or even increase their CapEx guidance, then I think we could see NVIDIA trade higher on that news. This earnings season is much more important than usual given the trade situation. Now, over the long term, I still think NVIDIA will be fine as we continue seeing massive demand from companies like OpenAI, xAI Perplexity, and others. NVIDIA still has a strong moat across both hardware and software, and companies that upgrade from Hopper to Blackwell equipped with NVIDIA Dynamo will still see a 40x in revenue from their AI factories. And so we need to remember that the problems NVIDIA is dealing with right now are not problems of a demand shortage, nor are they problems of a competitor unseating them. Rather, NVIDIA is caught in the crossfire of a trade conflict between the two largest economies in the world. It's important to remember this because the underlying thesis behind NVIDIA remains intact. We just have to get through this period of tariffs and trade tensions first. At least that's my view of the situation. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.